The knock came at 5:07 p.m., 10 years since the last mom. I opened the door to my daughter and the man who taught her to erase me. On the entry table, a khaki envelope with a blue string. 3 months I let it sit there, quiet as a decision that already knew its answer. "Mom, we need to talk," she said. He looked past me like square footage could change the math. "We're short. 150,000 would..." Would what? Turn back 10 calendars? Put my name back on Christmas? I set a coffee down in front of the girl I raised and didn't offer one to the man who measured love in invoices. I didn't stumble into money. I stood in a fire until it made light. I untied the blue string, paper that doesn't curl when tears find it. I said 2 letters and a trust. My love is not a line item. I won't fund your emergencies. I will fund my grandchildren. Health, school, a safe roof, therapy, a winter coat, a week at camp. Kids only. No cash to adults. Independent trustee. Guardrails, not grudges. He blinked like silence might save him. "They'll hear you wouldn't help your own family," he tried. "Let them hear the truth," I said. "I chose the kids. I chose peace. If you came honest, the porch light is on. If you came with math where your heart should be, the door still closes. Now, let me tell you how we got here."
The kettle was already warm. Most late afternoons here are a negotiation between tea and quiet. While it came to a boil, I listened to the house breathe around them. The farmhouse is old enough to have learned patience. The walls don't argue. The floors say what they need to say when the seasons change, and then fall still again. I had painted the kitchen cabinets myself the winter after the settlement, the blue of lake water when the wind is asleep. People thought I would throw money at things. They didn't understand what I had bought. When I came back with a mug, I set it down in front of Lauren. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. I remembered those hands as a little girl's, sticky with popsicle, reaching for my neck. A lot can happen between popsicles and paperwork. "Let's not pretend we're just catching up," I said. "You didn't drive up the mountain to ask about my tomatoes." Evan cleared his throat. He always did that before he delivered something he considered difficult. If he ever took responsibility, I figured it might be preloaded on a USB drive hidden in his molars. He said, "We'll get right to it. The market turned. The lender... Look, the truth is we're short. 150,000 would..." "Would what?" I asked, not bothering to soften it. "Turn back 10 calendars? Put my number back in your phone? Buy me a seat at Christmas?" He blinked once, slow enough that I could have reached out and pushed his eyelids the rest of the way down. He looked to Lauren like she might rescue him, which is the bargain they made the day she said yes. She had always been good at smoothing the parts of life that should have stayed sharp. "It would keep the kids in their school," Lauren said, eyes on the coffee. "It would buy us time. Time is expensive, and it never goes on sale." "Mom," she whispered, and the word came out as if it had too many consonants. When Evan married my daughter, he brought me a basket of muffins from the warehouse store and a pamphlet about boundaries he'd printed off the internet. I was happy to see anyone carrying a pamphlet that wasn't about lawn fertilizer or politics. He handed it to me like it was the deed to a smaller life and told me how excited he was to have me involved elsewhere. I asked him where elsewhere was, and he said words like independence and space, and then told me their home needed clean air. I had been an ER nurse 28 years by then, and I knew the smell of infection when it dressed itself up like cleanliness. They moved 15 minutes away, and then they moved the number I'd called Lauren on since she got her first flip phone. Holidays turned into "we'll try" and "we're keeping it low-key," and then "we'll see you after the new year." After the new year is a country the Postal Service doesn't deliver to. I asked once why my calls rolled into voicemail as if that was their forever address, and Evan said, "May, we can't do your drama on top of the rest." I reminded him I had lived most of my life requisitioning vent settings and telling grown men to breathe through a chest tube while their wives learned how to sign with a hand that suddenly wouldn't stop shaking. If I wanted drama, I would have kept the night shift. He smiled the way people smile when they've never met truth face to face. I didn't stumble into money, I told them now. I stood in a fire until it made light. Evan's jaw made its little tick, the one that is supposed to look like control when it's really panic in a pressed shirt. He said, "We heard something about a case. Congratulations."
It wasn't luck, I said. A hospital system lied and sick people paid. I wrote down the lies. I handed them over. 6 years later, the government handed me a check that bought siding and a roof and the kind of quiet you can sleep inside. It didn't buy me you. I could tell he wanted to say the money made it easier to cut me off, the way people remove valuables before a flood. He stayed quiet. For once in his life, he thought silence might give him ground. "Mom," Lauren said, trying again to find her own voice, "I miss you." I let that hang a second. The thing about missing is you can feel it from across town, across a decade, across a state line, and still never put your keys in your hand and drive. The last time I heard your voice in this house was the afternoon you stood where you are now and told me you needed space. You said it like it was medicine. I asked how much. You said you didn't know. I asked what it was for. You said it was for the marriage. I am not a disease, Lauren. I am a mother who made you grilled cheese at midnight and sat on the edge of your bed when you woke up scared of thunderstorms. I am not a hurricane you bored up for. She pressed her lips together until they went white. I could see the old Lauren, the one who used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she didn't want to cry, reach for the new Lauren who had taught herself how not to cry at all. "I'm here now," she said. "We're here. You're here because a bank set a date and because somebody in town set a number. A rumor will travel twice as fast as a fact because it doesn't have to carry any weight. After the settlement cleared, I kept working until spring. I retired not because money was a trampoline, but because the case ran me out of air and the nights got heavier than the days. I bought the farmhouse up Highway 126, where the ridge holds back the worst of the wind, and I planted apple trees because I wanted something that would take years to do what it was supposed to. The day I signed the closing papers, Ruth and Margot and Denise stood in my empty kitchen and brought me a plate of biscuits and a little battery lantern and said, "Welcome home." 2 weeks later, we started meeting on Wednesdays. We called it the porch light circle because none of us had people ringing the doorbell anymore. You turn a light on for strangers. You keep it on for your own heart. "If they come," Ruth had said one afternoon, icing sweating in a glass, "let the silence tell you who's talking." "Put everything in writing," Margot had said, "especially love. And never loan what you can't gift," Denise had added. "If you can't gift it, don't call it a loan." So I wrote things down. I talked to a lawyer about how to love grandchildren without buying grown men out of their consequences. I opened a trust that says what it means the first time. I wrote 2 letters on thick paper that doesn't curl when tears find it, and I tied them up with blue string because some rituals deserve tenderness. Then I put the letters and the papers in the envelope and I set it on the table by the door, and I learned to walk past it without touching it for 90 days. "I made coffee," I said. "We should get down to numbers," Evan said, as if the kitchen timer had just gone off in his head. "I don't want to waste your—" "You don't have that power, Evan," I said. Lauren's eyes flinched again, not at me, but at the thing between us that had been there since the first time he rang our bell and announced he would be a son if I would become less of a mother. "When your youngest had RSV last winter, did you think to call me?" "No," she said, sounding like the word hurt on the way out. "When the water heater burst in March and you tried to mop up a lake with a bath towel?" "No." When I turned 60 and bought my own cupcake and lit one candle and told myself it was fine because I learned how to sing to myself? Her mouth trembled. No! Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the way a man does when he's about to ask for an interest rate. Mari, we're not here to relitigate. That word doesn't mean what you think. We're not in court today. We're sitting in the living room of the woman who changed your wife's diapers and taught her how to read traffic and voted for school levies. You want to talk about litigation because it's easier than admitting you rewrote birthdays like they were policies. But fine, since you brought up paperwork. I picked up the envelope. Their eyes moved with it like it might sprout a mouth and say yes for me. I decided what to do before you knocked. I decided before anybody in town said a single syllable about my bank account. I made this decision when the settlement cleared and I slept for the first time without a pager clipped to my waistband. I made it when I stopped checking my phone to see if a miracle had left a missed call. I untied the blue string. It made a small sound that only people who pay attention would have heard. I slid out the letters and the trust document. The paper felt like a friend. I wrote 2 letters, one to you, Lauren, one to your children. There's also a document my lawyer drafted. You brought a lawyer into this? Evan's voice tried to laugh and came up empty. I brought clarity. You don't like clarity because it doesn't move when you push it. I handed Lauren the first letter. My handwriting is practical. I've written names on chart stickers at 3 a.m. with coffee shaken in my veins, and I've written condolences on small cards for nurses who don't have mothers anymore. This letter was steady. Read it out loud, I said. Her eyes flicked to Evan and back to me. Mom, your voice, I want to hear it. She swallowed and began. Dear Lauren, I love you. That part is not up for debate. My love is not a line item, and it isn't a switch. I will not finance your husband's emergencies. I will not invest in a marriage that made me an exile. I will not put cash into hands that dropped my number for a decade and then picked it up with a price tag attached. I can love you without paying him. Here's what I'm willing to do. I will meet my grandchildren in a public place you choose. I will respect your rules for them. I will bring nothing but myself and a paper crane. I will not talk to them about what happened unless you invite me to. I will be a consistent presence if you become one too. That is my yes. She stopped. Her hands shook again. I let the room breathe. The air here tastes like pine if you let it sit in your mouth a second. And this, I said, tapping the second sheet, is the trust. Evan's lips flattened. This is ridiculous. You haven't read it. I can guess. You're not good at that either, I said, and took the paper back. It's simple. The trust activates only for the children. It pays for health expenses, therapy, school fees, a safe roof, a week at camp, a winter coat, tutors, a ticket out of town to go see the ocean for the first time. It does not give cash to adults. It cannot be used to pay off your house or your car or your debts. It will be administered by an independent trustee who was not me and not you. If you want to curse at someone about it, I'm giving you an extra layer of protection. You'll have to curse at a stranger. You would do this to us? Evan asked, as if I was offering him broccoli when he wanted a ribeye. I would do this for them, I said. This is me loving my grandchildren in a way they can't lose when the economy sneezes or their father makes a deal with his ego and loses. You think I'm the problem. I think you're a symptom, I said. The disease is a kind of pride that tells a girl she has to choose between the mother who told her the truth and the husband who tells her he's the truth. I'm a nurse. I treat the cause when I can. When I can't, I treat the people the cause will hurt.
Lauren's mouth opened and closed twice. You already set this up? 3 months ago, the day I realized gossip travels faster than truth, and gossip doesn't stop for gas. Everyone is going to hear, Evan said, his voice dropping to the tone men use when they think they've cornered you. They're going to hear that the woman who got rich off old people's bills wouldn't help her own family. There, I said, you just told on yourself. What does that even mean? It means you don't want help, Evan. You want leverage. You think if people point at me and say stingy, I'll hand you a pen and tell you where to side. I don't barter in shame. He leaned in, elbows sliding. I'm trying to save my family. Try honesty first, I said. It requires less upkeep. He looked at Lauren. For a second, the room showed me everything I had missed and everything I had known anyway. The small corrections she made to herself to fit into the frame he held up, the compliments that had hooks in them, the strategies that all ended with me being someone who loved too much to be tolerated. Mom, she said, and this time the word sounded like it was the only one she had left. I was wrong. I let him decide where you belonged in my life. Lauren, he said, low, a warning masquerading as care. I can love you without funding him. I can help your children without entering his books. Those are my terms. They're not punishments. They're guardrails. We're leaving, he said, because men like him always stand up when they think height is an argument. Lauren didn't move. What would it take, she whispered, eyes on me, not him, to help us?
Time, I said. Therapy. Proof that the word us includes me when the money's gone. Evan reached for the doorknob like he could open it into a world that would agree with him. People are going to hear about this, he said, a final arrow he believed would find a soft place. They already have, I said. They heard I worked nights until my bones ached and told the truth in rooms where it didn't want to be heard. They heard I planted trees instead of buying a boat. Let them hear I kept my porch light on for kids I haven't met. Lauren stood with a sound like fabric, giving up. She looked smaller than she had when she arrived, not because she had lost anything, but because the truth had shrunk everything that wasn't hers to carry. I'm sorry, she said. I know. I am not a bank, Lauren. I am a mother. Come back when you know the difference. They walked out to the gravel drive. The sun had dropped behind the ridge, turning the air the color of old pennies. I watched them go the way you watch a storm cross a field, fascinated, relieved to see the back of it, aware that something you planted might still get flattened. When the house was quiet again, I put the letters back in the envelope and tied the blue string. I placed it on the table, not because I needed it anymore, but because I liked the look of decisions that hold still. Then I made myself dinner, a bowl of beans with the last tomato from the vine, buttered cornbread still too hot to cut, and I ate at the little table by the window, where on winter mornings the light comes in like a hymn you don't remember learning. My phone buzzed. Ruth, how'd it go? I told her the short version, because there's a mercy in brevity. As expected, I typed, I chose the kids. I chose peace. Proud of you, she sent back. Leave the porch light on. I slept that night with the windows cracked and dreamed nothing. In the morning, the ridge wore a scarf of fog that lifted slow as a curtain. I watered the new apple saplings and ran my hand along their thin trunks and promised them I would be here when they were ready to do the thing they were made for. You can live a long time on quiet. You can also starve on it if you don't invite anyone over. On Wednesday, the porch light circle came, and we sat with iced tea rings sweating onto the old pine of my table. Denise told a story about teaching herself to fix a leaky faucet because her son kept saying he'd come next weekend, and next weekend turned into a season. Margot passed around a photo of a granddaughter with a front tooth newly gone. Ruth brought me a book about women who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. I brought out a little stack of index cards and wrote down 3 things I was more today than I had been a year ago. Rested, stubborn, free. On Thursday, I went into town and bought printer paper and long yellow envelopes and a bag of dog biscuits for the stray that has decided my back steps are a respectable address. At the feed store, Mr. Alvarez asked if I needed more seed, and I told him I was stocked. He said he'd heard something, and I told him I had too. He tapped his temple with one finger. "This is the only place that needs stocking," he said, and I smiled, because if you don't recognize blessing when it puts on overalls and stands in front of you, you miss the good part. A week later, a plain white envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a tiny square photo of 2 children at a county fair, one holding a paper cup of lemonade, the other with a face painted like a tiger. No note. I put the photo under the salt jar on my kitchen shelf, where I would see it each time I reached for what makes things taste like themselves. I didn't tell the porch light circle, some tenderness you hold close until it stops shaking. I didn't hear from Evan. Pride makes a lot of noise until it doesn't. I did hear from Julie, who teaches 2nd grade and lives up past League James, because I'd called the school and asked whether there was a way to get a backpack into the hands of a child whose name I wasn't supposed to say out loud. "There's always a way," she said. And I drove a box of notebooks and colored pencils and a coat with the tags folded into the cuff, and I dropped it off at the office and wrote, "From a neighbor," on a sticky note. It didn't make me a hero. It reminded me I could act on love even when grief took a number and sat in a corner. Most of my living now happens in small, unremarkable rooms. The clinic on Fridays where I check blood pressures and refill pill organizers for people who raise their eyebrows when they realize someone still wants to touch their wrist and call it care. The thrift store on Saturday mornings where I learned which days the donations brought out the kind of picture frames that still hold fast around what they're given. My kitchen, where some nights I cook recipes that belong to women I never met and still thank. I like routine because it doesn't owe you a surprise. It shows up and stands beside you. There's a comfort in that loyalty. There was a time I would have sold these routines for a phone call. I would have traded evenings on the porch for a seat at a birthday table where somebody's cake had plastic balloons on it and the frosting was too sweet. I would have given away quiet if it bought me the sound of my daughter saying, "Mom, do you have a minute?" I would have mortgaged anything in me that still believed in miracles for an invitation that didn't arrive 6 days late. Pain will turn your heart into a pawn shop if you let it. Love will turn it back into a sanctuary when you remember who has keys. The morning I found the courage to make the call about the hospital fraud, it wasn't because I thought I would win. I did it because a woman came into the ER with a wristband from a clinic that billed for appointments she never kept because life kept her. A child wheezed on a gurney that had been marked as replaced 2 years before while I nudged the oxygen up and prayed with my hands. That's why I wrote down names and dates and numbers on a legal pad I brought at the pharmacy and slipped it into my bag under the granola bar and the spare pair of socks. That's why when the lawyer asked me whether I understood how long it might take, I said I knew what 6 years felt like. I know what 10 feels like too. Time isn't an enemy, it's a map that refuses to lie. The second text from Lauren came on a Sunday night at 9:43, the kind of time people choose when they hope you won't answer. "Mom, I started therapy. I don't know how to fix us yet, but I want to learn. If you ever want to meet the kids, I want that too. I'm sorry." I didn't answer that night, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because the best things I know how to say are never the ones I write fast. I set the phone face down on the table and went outside. The sky was doing that thing it does here in late summer when it pretends it's going to set itself on fire before it remembers it's just the sky. The ridge held its line against the dramatic parts. I stood on the porch and flipped on the light. People think porch lights are signals. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're just the way a woman says, if you come honest, you won't trip on the last step. I slept well. In the morning, I replied to my daughter's message with 12 words. Thank you for telling me. I'm ready to meet them when you are. She wrote back 2 minutes later, because longing sits near the soft keys on a phone. Tuesday? The library in town? 4 o'clock? I wiped my hands on a dish towel, even though they were clean, and typed yes before doubt could put its hand on my shoulder and tell me a story that used to be true. At 3:58 on Tuesday, I sat in a chair shaped like a comma at the children's section of the library and counted the number of people who love books enough to sit in chairs designed for someone else. The librarian smiled at me over a stack of returns, and then at the clock, like she could hurry time along with her face. She had a cat printed on her sweater, and a name tag that said she'd been there since before the last 2 mayors. Lauren walked in with a girl in a pink jacket and a boy with shoelaces self-tied to prove it. The girl looked at me the way children look at a new teacher the first day of school. Curious, cautious, not yet willing to agree to anything. The boy looked at the globe and spun it to see if the Pacific Ocean had changed since last week. Hi, my daughter said, and there was nothing in it to cut yourself on. This is Kaylee. This is Ben. I stood. The way you stand matters. You can rise up like a person who is owed, or you can stand like a person who is present. I chose the second. Hello, I said. I'm May. Some people call me Mom. Some people call me Miss May. You can call me whatever feels best right now. Kaylee considered it. How long do you read every day? She asked, which is exactly the kind of question that saves people from saying the wrong thing. As long as I can, I said. Ben pointed at the globe. Have you ever been on a plane? I thought of how many times I had taken off from hope and landed somewhere else. Yes, I said. The clouds look like the top of whipped cream if you squint. He smiled. He has Evan's eyebrows, but not his eyes. Or maybe he has Lauren's eyes on a day when they belong fully to her. We wandered the stacks together like shoppers in an orchard. Kaylee held on to her mother's sleeve with one hand and then let go to reach for a book with a girl on the cover whose hair refused to be quiet. Ben found a book about machines that take pictures of bones. He asked whether I had ever seen inside an arm. I told him I had seen inside a lot of things. He said cool, and the librarian shushed him gently without malice. We read sitting on the rug that smelt like sugar and dust. I did voices. You learn how to do them when you read to children at 3 in the morning in emergency rooms and they're too tired to cry. Lauren watched me with the expression I used to see when she summed up fractions correctly the first time. I didn't look back every second because joy is jumpy when you stare at it. I let the moment do what it was doing. Before we left, I handed Kaylee a small paper crane I had folded at my kitchen table. For your bookshelf, in case the books want a friend. She held it as if it had a pulse. Ben asked whether I could fold a frog next time. I said I would try. He asked if frogs can be blue. I said the paper ones can. At the desk, Lauren stopped, and the pause was made of all the pauses we hadn't used on each other in a decade. Thank you, she said. Me too, I said. On the way out, she didn't reach for me and I didn't reach for her, and it still felt like the first step of a dance that doesn't require music. After, I drove the long way home because I wasn't ready for the house to hold all of that. I passed a field that used to be soybeans and is now one of those subdivisions with names like Whispering Oaks, even though the trees are too young to whisper. I waved at a man on a tractor because here we wave if someone is moving something heavier than they are. I took the curve by the creek slower than usual because I like the sound it makes when it is talking to itself after rain. The sky did not announce anything. They didn't have to. That week in the clinic, Mrs. Trammell asked me why I was smiling. I told her a library story. She told me one back. "What do you call this season?" she asked, peeling back the cuff of her sweater so I could wrap the blood pressure cuff. "What season?" "The season where you still love and you don't let love rob you." "Adulthood," I said. She laughed. "You got there eventually," she said, and I told her I had to take the scenic route. Some roads here do that to you, looping around the same stand of trees until you finally figure out there was never a shortcut. 2 Saturdays later, Evan texted. The words were polite. The tone was a tired man who thinks he has discovered humility. "Maylee, appreciate the library thing. The trust seems excessive. Maybe we can talk numbers again." I typed and erased 3 different replies. Then I wrote one sentence. "The trust isn't a negotiation. You're welcome to participate in what it offers." There was a long gap, and then only this. "We'll be in touch." Silence followed that message, the way fog follows the river at dawn. I didn't miss him. The porch light circle came that Wednesday with a casserole that could feed a basketball team and a jar of pickles that tasted like summertime bragging. I told them the short version of the library. Ruth cried because she is not afraid of crying. Denise said, "Frogs can be blue," and slapped the table like she had just won a bet with an old version of herself. Margot asked if I had felt the urge to sprint, and I said yes and no and yes. She said, "Your body remembers the old choreographies, but you don't have to keep dancing that way." The message from Lauren about therapy turned into a habit. Once a week, a text with something small. Today I learned I apologize to avoid fights, not to repair them. Today I practice saying what I want without apologizing for wanting it. Today the counselor said grief is like a tide. Sometimes you can't tell which way it's going until your ankles are wet. I didn't run commentary. I didn't send the articles I had once printed for myself and then thrown away, because knowledge without community will drown you just as surely as ignorance will. I wrote back like a woman who had learned to put a period at the end of a sentence and not collapse. "Proud of you. I'm here. That makes sense. Take your time." Once she wrote, "I told Evan about the kids-only trust again, and he said you were undermining him." The counselor asked whether he knows the difference between authority and control. I didn't write back fast. I let the screen glow on the table until the phone went to sleep by itself. Then I typed, "One protects, the other isolates." She didn't answer that night. The next morning, "Thank you." If I could go back and change the afternoon she told me I was external interference, I would not say something clever or cruel. I would place a glass of water on the table and ask her to hold it for 10 minutes while we talk, then 20, then 30. Then I would point out that the glass didn't change. The water didn't change. What changed was how heavy it felt. That's grief. That's love with nowhere to go. It's not that you can't carry it. It's that you shouldn't carry it alone. I didn't have that metaphor then. I do now. Life is generous with wisdom if you survive long enough to hear it. Sometimes I drive out to the edge of the national forest and park where the gravel gives up and the asphalt keeps going just because it can.
I walk the trail until the trees change their minds about whether they want to be pines or something else, and I sit on a flat rock and listen to the mountain have the last word. It always does. The mountain is patient with what people think they deserve. It offers itself, and if you take the offering, you get to see something older than your arguments. 3 months after the first knock, I walked into the farmer's market downtown for apples and came out holding ginger, a loaf of bread, and my heart in both hands, because Lauren and the kids were at the booth with the honey, reading the sign about bees. Evan wasn't there. She looked up at me like a woman who had been practicing exactly how not to stare. Kaylee waved with the paper crane tucked in her jacket pocket, edges softened the way paper does when it has been carried between a hand and a heartbeat. Then pointed at a jar and told me bees sleep with one eye open, which felt like a fact people should whisper in church. "One day at a time," Lauren said. "That's how porches are built," I said. We stood there with people pressing around us, and the smell of peaches and vinegar and cinnamon turning the air into a pie. And I didn't cry, because there is a kind of happiness that sits still so it won't scare itself away. We made a plan to meet at the park next week and bring nothing to trade but time. I want to tell you that Evan apologized. He did not. He circled around apology like a wary dog around a grill. He sent one more message about numbers, and then another one that said he didn't understand why I was so angry. That's the thing about men who measure their worth by managing. They don't learn the difference between guilt and grief, because to them, both feel like their control lost something. I didn't teach him. I taught myself how to not reel in the net of my peace just because somebody else decided to stir the water. The day the first disbursement from the trust paid for Kaylee's therapy, Lauren texted me the receipt with the therapist's name blacked out, the way we agreed. "Thank you. She likes the room with the plants." I sent a picture of my monstera in the living room that has decided to outgrow its corner because I told it could. Maybe we both needed to see leaves taking up space unapologetically. When the kids caught the flu, Lauren sent me a video of Ben under a blanket watching a documentary about turtles. "He said frogs can be blue," he added, half asleep. And I felt my chest do that thing where it becomes something other than a rib cage. If you're listening to me now and your hands are on the wheel or in the sink or folded in your lap at the end of a day you survived, I don't know the names of the people who didn't show up for you. I don't know what you bought for yourself to make it through the year they forgot to invite you. I don't know if you walked around the block and told yourself you were fine, even when you weren't. But I know this. You can love without purchasing your own erasure. You can forgive without writing a check. You can keep your light on without standing in the yard and shouting to the road that doesn't deserve your voice. Evan will tell the story he knows how to tell. That's his loss. Lauren is learning a different language. That's her gain. The kids are learning that love comes with boundaries the way it comes with bedtimes and vegetables, and the rule about helmets on bicycles. The mountain keeps its line. The orchard will ask me for taller ladders someday and a back that is kind to itself, and I will say yes where I can and no where I must, which is the only way to still be here. Sometimes, late, when the dark is honest, I talk to the envelope by the door even though I don't need it anymore. I tell it what the house already knows, that we are safe, that we are not alone, that grief shows up and asks for a seat and we offer it one without giving it the head of the table. I pour a glass of water and drink it slow and set it down without flinching. I close my eyes and ask the sky the same question the boy asked me at the library. Can frogs be blue? They can. Some things are allowed to be what they weren't sure they were, just because the paper said so and the hands that folded them believed. If you came to my porch tonight, you would find a small bowl of dog biscuits by the step and a chair with an old cushion that sighs when you sit. You would find a woman who finally learned how to measure her life with something other than invitations. You would see a light left on, not to beg anybody home, but to tell the truth without shouting. You'd hear the creak if the wind is kind. You'd know, even if I didn't say it, that I am still ready to love, just not willing to pay to be allowed. A few days ago, Lauren texted a picture of a worksheet from Kaylee's backpack. The prompt at the top said, "Write about a person you can be yourself around." The handwriting was careful, the way little girls' handwriting is when they are trying to make the letter S behave. She wrote, "My Grandma May makes paper animals and lets you talk. She doesn't hurry you. She makes you feel like the thing you said is the right size." I read it twice. I read it out loud to no one. Then I put the phone face down and looked at the ridge until the line between the mountain and the sky got thin enough that a person who believed in miracles might think they were touching. I walked to the door and turned on the porch light, knowing it did not change the dark. It changed my posture inside it. They will knock again in one way or another. The door is not a weapon, and it isn't a welcome mat. It's a hinge between the life I earned and the one I still invite. I will open it if the people on the other side come honest. I will close it if they arrive with math where their heart should be. Either way, I will sleep. When I was an ER nurse, on nights when the ambulance bay doors fell open thunder loud and rolled a story in on wheels, I learned to count in eights. Breathe, check, decide, move, let go. Now when life arrives with a siren or a whisper, I do the same. I breathe. I check what's mine. I decide for peace. I move toward it. I let go of what drags. I start over if I have to. That's how you hold on without gripping so hard you break your own fingers. I think about the pamphlet sometimes, the one Evan brought with the muffins. He meant it like a leash. I kept it like a mirror. Boundaries aren't a wall around love. They're the doorframe that keeps the roof from falling in on it. 10 years ago, I would have prayed for a different ending. Today, I say thank you for a truer one. I learned how to draw a line in blue ink and tie it with a little string and lay it on a table by a door and live with the kind of quiet that doesn't accuse. That is a good lesson to learn before the apples come in heavy and your hands feel like your mother's did when she was 61 and still reaching. I don't know how to make the world kinder. I know how to make a pot of soup and a paper crane and a trust fund that refuses to be a bribe. I know how to leave a porch light on. I know how to love a daughter who is learning to speak the language of herself. I know how to tell a man no without apologizing. I know how to look at a ridge and remember that edges are holy because they define. I know how to say my own name into a house I chose and hear it come back to me unbroken. Tonight there's a note folded on my table in blue ink, the kind of note a person writes to remember their own instructions. It says, when they knock, answer with what is true. It says, you don't owe anyone money for access to your heart. It says, pour the glass of water and set it down before it's too heavy. It says, be the porch, not the beggar at the road. It says, love the children with a plan and the adults with a boundary. It says, frogs can be blue. It says, go to sleep. So I do, and I will. And if you're listening and you need the word your own mouth has been afraid of, borrow mine. You can give them back in the morning.